Okay, awesome. Welcome back. I'm registered dietitian Myrna Haag. Welcome to the Myrna Method live stream, where I try to bring you impactful nutrition information. I share with my patients, I want to share with my followers, because I think the biggest problem with nutrition is, number one, we're not getting good information. We're getting a lot of information, but there's not a lot of science or biochemistry behind it. So as a registered dietitian, I want to bring you the biochemistry, the information, and things that I think will be super impactful for you. And what we're going to talk about in this video is glycogen. Because I'm seeing all over the internet, and plus my patients come up to me half the time, they do not understand there are certain biochemical processes that go on in the body that they don't just not go on because somebody decides a diet doesn't need it. There's certain functions that go on that will happen whether you want them to or not. And there'll be consequences when you don't understand how those things happen. And I think glycogen is one of them, muscle glycogen. So I want to explain to you why not knowing about muscle glycogen can actually sabotage your weight loss, can cause fatigue, dehydration, and a lot of diets just ignore it like it doesn't exist. So let's explain to you the chemistry behind it, and I hope at the end of this video you will agree with me that muscle glycogen truly matters. So Sam, if you'll switch on to the PowerPoint, we'll get rolling. All right. So why fasting and keto benefits don't matter. And yeah, there are benefits to fasting and keto, guys, or else they wouldn't be making the headlines. But unless you're considering some real biochemical processes that go on in the body, some of these diets don't do a complete circle. It's kind of like getting half the circle done really great, hurrah, hurrah, but then, well, we kind of sort of don't do the other half so well. And you want to complete a full circle when it comes to your health. So let's talk about how muscle glycogen, in this case, completes the full circle when we're talking about nutrition. So let's get through the key words here so that we can understand this video. We're going to talk about the keto diet, the low-carb diet, and of course fasting. And then we're going to talk about the macronutrient diet and the Myrna methodology, because I am a dietitian. I don't look at diets. I'm not going to follow paleo or vegan. I'm going to look at the science behind food. I'm not going to give it a label. I'm going to make it work for the person. So when we look at diets, there's some real key fundamental issues. Well, they're not even issues. A lot of people say, well, that's your philosophy. It's really not a philosophy. It's not an issue. It's science. This is how the body works. Okay? Now, we can have variation among that. But when we talk about specifically certain things that the body wants you to make happen for it, glycogen is definitely one of them. And glycogen is in the muscle, it's in the liver, it's in the heart muscle as well. Primarily 80% of the glycogen is in muscle tissue, and you're covered in muscle, hopefully. Glycogen is stored glucose. It's actually the carbohydrates that you're eating when they break down into glucose, and they get stored where? Well, in the muscle. Now, the liver is wonderful because the liver can not only store glucose, but actually can make glucose. But that does not negate glycogen in the muscle. They're two separate things. The fact that glucose is made in the liver doesn't mean, well, let's just ignore muscles like they don't exist and they don't have demands. Nope, you got to make muscles happy too. Because if you really want to get it right, and I mean get to your leanest and healthiest weight, because really as a dietitian, a lot of times that's my foremost goal for patients, because I know if I can get them to live at their leanest weight, they will be their healthiest. Labs change. And by the way, just because you lose weight doesn't mean you can maintain your leanest weight. Just means you lost weight. And a lot of times people lose weight and they haven't gotten rid of obesity. because it's a biochemical balance you must do. And muscle glycogen is part of that balance. So we're going to talk about the muscles demanding this sugar, what it all means, and why fasting and keto diets sort of just kind of ignored it. Then we're going to talk about the mitochondria, because that really is the powerhouse of the cell. This is where all the energy exchange is taking place, in the mitochondria. So I think it's worth talking about, because it is related to the muscle glycogen. That's the storage capacity of carbs in the muscle. And also insulin resistance is also related to muscle glycogen. So in this video, we're going to keep it very specific to the capacity of muscles to want to store carbs. There's a lot more into this. I'm not going to be talking about the liver and how it generates sugar. That's another video. Super interesting, and I think it's probably worth talking about as well. So let's talk about fasting. Let's break down each one of these. So fasting is when you're really abstaining from food and drink for a certain period of time, either for your health. Most of the time it's because people have heard that fasting will increase autophagy, will make them healthier, and also will reduce their body size or their fat because they figure they're eating less. Religious reasons, rituals, ethics. So there's a lot of different reasons why people fast. And fasting is usually 12 hours, 16 to 18 hours, 24 hours, 2-day fast, alternate day fast, weekly fast, 24-hour fast once a week. So there's a whole lot of different ways that people will do the fasting. A 12-hour fast, I don't see really any issue with that. But when you start getting into the 16 and 18-hour fasts, then that really can disrupt your protein capacity. That can actually possibly cause muscle atrophy. Because the way protein is designed is the body would like to have it pretty much consistently throughout the day. But this video is not about protein. It's about muscles and more on the line of carbohydrates. But I thought I'd mention that. But the other thing that fasting does in regards to what we're talking about is that it creates what I call a feedback loop. So when you do a lot of fasting or calorie restriction, you can be in a situation that you create this little bit of an imbalance, because let's face it, when you're going 18 hours without food or 24 hours with food, it's an imbalance, okay? Because in a real situation, the body would not like to be in a starvation mode. It would like to have food easily available. And yes, it does do compensatory things. It does try to compensate and create certain things that in some ways could be helpful. But a lot of times it's not something that's sustainable, and people are doing it not because it's easy to do, but because they really believe they're going to hit one of these goals, most of the time being health or weight loss. And we'll talk about some of the health benefits in relationship to the muscle glycogen when it comes to fasting. Keto, a high-fat, low-carb eating pattern that emphasizes foods that are rich in fat and foods that limit carbohydrates. And the percentages in the macronutrients are anywhere from 55 to 70% of your day's worth in fat, 30 to 35% of your day's worth in protein, and carbohydrates are only 5 to 10%. That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Is that a problem that carbohydrates are only 5 to 10%? It's a huge problem, because muscles want to have carbs. Now, I didn't say that they couldn't survive without them, because they certainly can. I said muscles want carbs. So it's not really about can we survive without them. When we look at a low-carb diet, carbs are a little better, 10 to 25%, but when muscles want anywhere from 35 to 55 or 60% carbs, and you're only giving it 10 to 25, there's going to be a payback. There's going to be a feedback loop. Something is going to cause a consequence for you. And that's what I want to discuss. Because at the end of the day, it's really not about losing weight. It's about, can you keep it off? Let's face it, right? Don't you like to think that you're on an eating plan that's super healthy and is maintaining your ideal body weight? Not one that you got to yo-yo all the time. Like, I think I'll do the Monday through Friday routine, and then on the weekend, a hope and a prayer that I don't gain it all back. Well, that's not really how it's done, by the way. The low-carb diet does not really help the muscle's desire for carbs. And we'll keep going because we've got the macronutrient diet. And the macronutrient diet has a little more reason to it. There's a little more science to it because it says fat needs to be anywhere from 20 to 25% for specific reasons. Protein 10 to 35%, carbohydrates 45 to 65%. So the macronutrient diet would seem to really hit the carb mark. But then what I'm going to show you as a dietitian, it doesn't really go all the way as well. Because when we're dealing with a macronutrient diet, and this is what I teach in the Myrna Method, and Sam later will show him how they can join my membership, where all I do is discuss how to eat to maintain your leanest and healthiest weight. And muscle glycogen is a big part of it. Eating a certain ratio of fats, protein, carbs, and fiber, because in the macronutrient diet from this dietitian, fiber is definitely a macronutrient that is super important. 4 things are in all foods: protein, fiber, carbs, and fat. So what you want to do is you want to eat a certain ratio of these macronutrients daily and at each meal. And why do you want to do that? Because you want to maintain a certain homeostasis to regulate the appetite. You want to maintain a homeostasis, and that just means balance in a way, of muscles, insulin, gut bacteria, and brain chemicals. Because if your muscles aren't happy and insulin isn't regulated and your gut bacteria isn't right and you're turning brain chemicals on that you shouldn't, you're going to be fat. You know why? Because your appetite's going to be super screwed up. It's not about a diet. It's about regulating your body to be able to balance itself. And by the way, if you're obese, that's not a balanced situation. If you have some medical condition, that's not a balanced situation. If you have diabetes, you have insulin resistance, these are all things that are not balanced. So a lot of times as a dietitian, I may have to adjust your diet a little differently, maybe a little bit. It's like a seesaw. If you're way up on one end, I may have to push it down on the other a little harder. But at the end of the day, once you get rid of these metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes, like insulin resistance, and morbid obesity, once we get down to our leanest weight, then we're living the life of homeostasis. We want muscles happy, insulin, gut bacteria, and brain chemicals. We want those things in the brain that turn on addiction to turn off. And there's a way to eat to do that, plain and simple. And understanding how glycogen works in the muscle is one of the ways, which is why I call it the muscle method. Muscles have a method. Now, most diets want to just focus on insulin, which I think the keto diet focuses on insulin because their whole thing is if I can just remove insulin by not bringing carbs in, you won't be hungry. And there's truth to that. But did you know there's also truth that muscles will trigger an addiction in the other side as well? Because muscles want a certain amount of carbs. So a lot of times in diets, they only maybe focus on one of these. And as a dietitian, my goal is to bring you the entire science. So yeah, keto diet, fasting, it serves a purpose, but for longevity. And I know with my podcast last week, and I frequently say this with a lot of my patients, is that a lot of times the diet that I put you on, because you have a certain condition, medical condition, metabolic condition, is not going to be the diet once you get rid of the condition. And I talked about that with type 3 diabetes, Alzheimer's. If you missed that one, I think it's a good one to watch because a lot of people don't realize a lot of cognitive decline is really a metabolic imbalance. And it comes down to appetite and really your diet. And the diet that you need once you have diabetes, once you have Alzheimer's or dementia, is not particularly the one that prevents it. In fact, if you're doing a lot of times a diet that you think is preventing a disease because people that are on the disease are using that diet, it could very well cause it. So I think nutrition is not just about people having a kind of an attitude about food, like, oh, I think we'll just eat this and do that. I mean, there's a lot of science behind it. I'm going to try to make it super simple because nobody wants things complicated. So when I look at carbohydrates, the range truly is anywhere from 35 to 55%. Why is there such a big range? And I think this is where a lot of people get really bent out of shape when they look at the American Dietetics percentages, or the CDC, Center for Disease Control. They're all saying, oh yeah, you need, 40 to 50% of your, or 45 or 50% of your diet coming from carbs. Well, they're only looking at one part of the population for that. That's if you're totally normal, you have no insulin resistance, and you're not overweight, and you're relatively active, which really, how many people don't have that, right? There's probably more people not in that norm curve right now. So probably not really good advice based on looking at the individual. So when we look at the carbohydrates, and then I'm going to really explain to you the biochemistry, and then we'll come back to this because I always like to do both, is if you're looking at carbohydrates and you're trying to figure out, well, how much do I really need for my muscles to be happy? Because if muscles aren't happy, they're going to trigger a binge eating situation. That's just what muscles do. So how do I make my muscles happy? How do I keep the storage of carbs where muscles are happy with them? Well, if you're obese, you have a lot of weight to lose, you have low activity, you have insulin resistance, diabetic, you're not exercising, you will take your ideal body weight and you'll have 1 gram of carbs for every pound you weigh at your ideal body weight. Not what you weigh now. You don't consider a carbohydrate percentage based on what you're eating now if you're super overweight. How does that make any sense, people? That would make no sense at all. It's based on your ideal body weight. That's what you're striving to be. So if your ideal body weight is 145 pounds, then and you're not active and you are overweight and you have insulin resistance, then you're probably fine. Your muscle capacity is probably going to be okay at 35 to 40%. But if you're super active or athletic, that's going to take you right down in the ditch because your muscle capacity is much higher. Muscles are demanding more carbs. And when muscles demand more carbs, there's a consequence to pay. It's called binging. And I see it all the time with my patients. So there is a certain science that revolves around glycogen and muscles and what they want. And in the Myrna Method, to me, I think that's super important. It makes one of my boxes. There's really only 4 things I want you guys to understand. Muscles have a method. You better do it because you're covered in them. And there'll be consequences to pay. Insulin's a hormone you don't screw with because insulin will get the backside of you. In other words, it will win at every game. Insulin will cause food addiction. It can cause a whole lot of mayhem. So we better figure out how it works and how food works with it. And then gut bacteria, the new frontier in medicine, by the way. So you better figure out how to figure that out. And then there's certain brain chemicals that if you turn on, you're screwed. You're eating from your brain. You're doing this hedonic cycle of more food and more food and more food. That's real blown food addiction. But what gets you there is when the muscles aren't right, insulin's a total mess, and the gut bacteria is way off. So if you want to be in a constant food addiction, yo-yo dieting, and you can't figure out how to eat, and you're so frustrated, just don't pay any attention to those 4 areas and you'll be there. It's typical American diet. So muscle glycogen, which is one of the key areas, let's get right into. Because if muscles aren't happy, you're not going to be able to stay on your diet. So what is the Myrna Method? What is this whole balance act that I try to do for my patients? I try to achieve a dietary chemical homeostasis for muscles, insulin, gut bacteria, and brain chemicals. Obviously, I have a course, I have a membership where all I do is just teach you what those want from you and food. Once you do that and you make them happy, they don't demand more food. They don't cause a yo-yo up and down situation. And then how do you make those areas happy? You combine protein, fat, carbs, and fiber at the end of the day at a certain amount and at each meal. It's that simple. It's really not more complicated than that. It's that simple. And then you know what happens? Your body drops you to your leanest weight. Yeah, isn't that wonderful? You don't have to count calories because your calories will be super low because you won't feel like eating. You won't be hungry. So it's not about 12-hour fast, oh, don't eat after 6. I'm like, if you're hungry, eat. And you know what? If you're not hungry, don't eat. That's when the body's super happy. You know, really, in today's world, the body would like for you not to put it in a starvation mode. Think about how stupid that is from the body's perspective. And the body will give you your healthiest body when you do what it asks you to do. It's that simple, by the way. The body is on a constant clean and heal. Your body, every second of the day, it does two things. It's trying to constantly heal you and trying to constantly clean you. That's it, bottom line. We screw that equation up. And as far as weight loss is concerned, foods that aren't balanced, it disrupts the appetite regulation. This leads to overeating, weight gain, inflammation, and obviously an increased risk for chronic diseases. So let's talk about one component of muscle desire, glycogen, stored glucose in the muscle. And your muscle's demand for sugar has to do a little bit with where you are medically. In other words, if you have insulin resistance, diabetes, morbid obesity, or anything over even 40 pounds can make a difference, and you are not active, your capacity for carbs is less. We're going to go over that. If you're at an ideal situation where you're just kind of normal, 40% would probably work fine. You're sedentary, but you're not really active. You sit on your computer most of the day. You do your typical go to the grocery store, come home. You take your ideal body weight, you multiply it by 1.2, and that'll give you the amount of grams you need. Minimum, right? And then if you're active, it's 1.4, and if you're athletic, it's 1.6. So it goes up in percentage based on what the muscle's demanding. And by the way, if you go from being an athlete this month to being super inactive the next month, that can change. If you eat more carbs than you eat, well, let's just say this. If you eat more than you burn, you gain weight. Calories do count. So the key is we don't want them to matter. The fact they count and the fact that it matters to you are two different scenarios. And the beautiful thing is that your body will drop you to your leanest calories if you understand to feed it where you don't cause food addiction. Because a lot of hunger is because we're out of balance. Insulin raging in your blood because you didn't understand carbohydrates. Maybe you really overshot this whole glycogen story in the muscle. You didn't even understand muscles. Ideally, the body would love if you could communicate with it. The body tells you things and you just don't seem to understand what it's saying. So if you are doing the basic muscle glycogen and then you go to the gym for an hour and you're pushing it really hard, you're going to probably need an extra 60 grams for that hour of carbs. If you're just moseying, dozing, it might be more like 30. One banana is 25 grams of carbs. So we're not talking like a heap load here. One potato is more like 50 or 60. So you add one more potato onto your whatever that carb amount is. So basically, you're increasing your carbs based on exercise. So let's get into some biochemistry. And once I do the biochemistry, then we'll go back, we'll look at some studies because I think that's so super important. And then we'll go back and look at some of the other things I said in the beginning so that it can make more sense. So let's talk about what goes on with insulin, sugar, and all about this muscle glycogen. I'm going to talk about type 2 and type 3 diabetes and insulin resistance. Insulin resistance can happen decades before type 2 and type 3 diabetes. I've done plenty of YouTube videos about this, how even exercise can mask the fact that athletes have type 2 diabetes. That's a really good one if you haven't seen it. So let's talk about the pathology. What happens is every time you eat a carbohydrate, that carbohydrate breaks down into glucose. Now, if you don't put any other food with that carbohydrate, let's say you just do a slice of white bread, that's going to be very glycemic, meaning it's going to enter your bloodstream super fast. And it's got one goal. Those carbs in the form of glucose are trying to get inside the muscle so that it can become muscle glycogen, stored glucose. It also, some of it's going to try to get in the brain because it also wants to provide sugar to the brain. So what happens is insulin also is released at the same time. Insulin is a hormone that allows the sugar to enter the muscle cell and allows the sugar to enter the brain cell. Very simple. So insulin is a hormone that attaches to a receptor site. When it attaches to a receptor site, it talks to a messenger who talks to another messenger and brings up a transporter to the membrane of the cell, not only in the muscle, but in the brain cell. And then what happens, a beautiful thing, is that sugar is then able to enter the muscle. When the sugar enters the muscle, it hydrates the muscle because it binds with water, which is why they're called carbohydrates. Carbo, fuel, hydrate, water. So it actually helps hydrate you at a cellular level. And when you do a low-carb diet, you can lose a lot of water weight, lose a lot of sodium, can really mess up your electrolytes, and you lose a lot of weight. Water weight because when you don't have carbs, you don't have a lot of binding, a lot of hydration at a cellular level. So this is a beautiful thing. This is how it works, but here's when it doesn't work. When you have a lot of excess fatty acids come from just being too fat. Maybe you're just eating too much and your fat cells are getting larger, and these fat cells then release fats from the fat cells, these fatty acids, when you have an excess of body fat, and also just an excess of dietary fat. In other words, it's not just eat as much fat as you want. There's actually some science behind, how much we should have. And these excess fats are in circulation and they can accumulate in muscle cells. And as they accumulate in muscle cells in excess, these fatty acids can then become a different type of fat called a ceramide. 2 weeks ago on my YouTube channel, I did a video. I'm not going to go into a lot of it in this one, but I would recommend to watch it. And I explain how sugar and insulin are not the root cause of type 2 diabetes or type 3 diabetes. It's actually these little ceramides. Not only ceramides, but you have immune cells that are highly inflammatory. They also get up into that receptor site and they make it incapable of messaging the transporter to come to the cell. Yep, transporter didn't know to do that. Never got the message because that insulin receptor site is clogged with too much fat. And these fats become damaging fats. These ceramides can then circulate into the bloodstream. And now we're measuring ceramides. Isn't that wonderful? Because we've got Quest Labs, Mayo Clinic. Well, I'm not sure about Quest Labs. So Mayo Clinic is now measuring the amount of plasma ceramides because we found that when you have a high level of ceramides, we can see problems with the pancreas. It can destroy the beta cells that make insulin, the heart tissue, the kidney, so that we know these ceramides are not something that we really want in circulation. And how are they happening? Excess fatty acids, the accumulated muscle cells, period. End of story. Now, why is the keto diet so popular? Because there's some good to it. Let's talk about the good. Well, really, I want to just talk about the pathology of the diet in general, right? I want to talk about how the path works, the study of the path of the diet. So when you're on a keto diet, well, a lot of the sugar isn't going to happen. Why is that? Because you're not going to eat a lot of carbs. Well, let me just tell you this. I forgot one really key note here is when you have a lot of carbs and you have insulin resistance, this thing is all clogged up and it's not allowing the transporter to come to the surface of the cell to allow the sugar in. Then what happens is you get a lot of buildup of the sugar outside the muscle cell. Now, when that happens, you didn't necessarily eat more, But the pancreas is just all confused and it releases even more insulin into the bloodstream. So now you have a situation, you have more insulin in the bloodstream. The muscle never got its glycogen, so the muscle's not really happy because the muscle wants to have a certain amount of glycogen to be happy. Happy muscles, happy person. Okay, so muscles are not real happy. I'm not saying that they can't use some of the fatty acids, and we'll talk about that because we're going to talk about the mitochondria and how that energy works. But right now we're addressing insulin resistance. So the muscles are unhappy. They didn't get their glycogen. They're probably not real hydrated. And insulin is just dumping into the blood because it's all confused because it sees more sugar in the blood. When you have a lot of insulin in the blood, one thing is for sure. You're going to be hungry. Yep. A lot of insulin in the blood and you're hungry. That's not a good situation because then what you're going to want to eat is more sugar, the very thing that you're having a problem getting into the muscle in the first place. Now, what the body does is it says, well, if I can't store sugar in a muscle, where I'd like to do, the body says, I am going to put it in a fat cell because it's always open for business. So the fat cell says, I'll take the sugar that you had a tough time getting into the brain, and the fat cell begins to take the sugar. And you get more fat in the midsection. This is why insulin resistance, we're typically going to see belly fat, usually a sign. So with the keto diet, what they're saying is, well, wow, we can reduce your hunger, which it really works, folks, by reducing the carbs. So they decide to take the carbs out of the diet. And it works because when you take the carbs out of the diet, now the muscles aren't happy, but you do have a wonderful scenario where the insulin is now not at a huge boatload in the blood. And you'll notice you don't get hungry, literally. And when you don't get hungry, guess what? You lose weight. So the golden rule for losing weight is don't get hungry. Seriously, it's pretty simple. But the problem is that we're only looking at insulin and blood sugar, which is why I don't use this method because it's not sustainable. And we're dumping more fats into the blood, which the science shows can actually cause more type 2 diabetes, but you won't be aware of it. Why won't you be aware of it? Because when you go to your doctors to test for the sugar in the blood, they're going to show a low A1C. They're not going to see a lot of sugar in the blood, and they're all going to be super happy. But then let me tell you what happens with patients in their late 60s and early 70s. I'm getting a lot of patients that eventually this catches up to them and they become a diabetic later in life. Same with a lot of athletes, because when you exercise, the transporter comes to the surface of the cell. You don't need insulin. So for a lot of athletes, they're moving a lot of sugar into the muscle cell just for the simple reason they're exercising, but they can still be causing type 2 diabetes, type 3 diabetes, which is Alzheimer's, because if it happens in the muscles, it's happening in the brain. So the keto diet serves some purpose in the sense that, yeah, you can get some weight off of you. Because if I can have somebody, well, let's talk about glycogen, and then I think this will make a lot more sense. So if I have somebody that has insulin resistance and they are overweight and they're not really active, what that is going to do, it means that the muscle will have less of a demand. In other words, the muscle responds with carbs based on your lifestyle. So if you're super active, then the muscle's going to want more carbs, because when we talk about the mitochondria and the actual energy, the carbs help produce vigorous energy. But when you have insulin resistance, the muscle doesn't need as many carbs. When you're inactive, it doesn't as well. So the demand is less. So it means that the muscles won't be telling the brain, because if you don't do muscle capacity, if you just decide that glycogen in the muscle isn't important, that's not how the muscles think, by the way. It might be how you think. The muscle will then tell the brain, I'm craving carbs. Even after eating a meal of full calories, you know what I'm talking about. A little bowl of ice cream turns into a big bowl of ice cream. You can't seem to turn the switch off. So let's talk more about the energy system, and then we're going to tie it all together. So what really causes a lot of this carbohydrate capacity, what really decides how much the muscles are going to want, is all going to depend on the energy system. So let's get right into it and talk about the mitochondria. So the mitochondria is a little organelle in all our cells, and the cells that have the most mitochondria are muscle cells, heart cells as well, but muscle cells have a lot of mitochondria because muscle cells are active. Okay, a heart is active as well because it's a pump, right? So muscle cells are super active, so they need a lot of little powerhouses so they can stay active for you. Now, the less active you have, the less activity you do, the less mitochondria you have. So the less active, the less muscle, the less mitochondria, the slower your metabolism. Your metabolism is in the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is what determines your energy level. It also has other properties as well, but in this video, we're just going to talk about the mitochondria in relationship to energy. So when you bring that sugar into the muscle because the insulin's working like it should, or maybe it's not, maybe you don't have a lot of sugar going into the muscle, but what that sugar does when it gets into that cell, not the mitochondria, but into the actual cell, into the cytoplasm, into the actual meatiness of the cell, it creates quick-acting energy, glycolysis, burning of sugar right from the cell. And that's a beautiful thing, cells like that, muscles particularly, because that's the fight or flight thing. That's where the body says, wow, we've got sugar in the muscle. We can really move from this lion that's chasing me because that's fast, vigorous, and it also makes muscles feel good. They're energized. Muscles want to have sugar inside them. Okay? Now, obviously, there's a capacity. So if muscles are full of sugar, then the sugar is going to be excess, and yeah, that'll go into a fat cell. Of any food, it doesn't need to be sugar. It can be any kind of food. You eat more than you burn, it's going in a fat cell. Sugar is no different. But there should be no reason why we wouldn't want carbs to be part of our diet, because I would think we'd want to be acting quick. I think we'd want to be vigorous in our sport and exercise and be motivated to exercise, because when you don't have a lot of sugar in your muscle cell, you are not motivated to exercise. Trust me when I tell you, I've trained many people, personal trainer, and I can tell you, I can always tell the people on a low carb or keto diet, because it takes about 15 minutes for them to warm up. And what do I mean by that? Eventually the liver will dump sugar into the blood. In this video, I am not talking about liver's role of providing sugar to the blood. That's a whole nother system. The liver can do that. I am literally talking just about the muscle. Let's give the muscle their fair share. Let's not talk about the liver. Yes, the liver can supply you with sugar even if you're on a low-carb diet. Not a boatload, but it can. Which is why people on a ketogenic diet say, well, we can get sugar from the liver. I don't deny that. And I'm not saying that if I have somebody who's insulin resistant, morbid obese, I wouldn't do a ketogenic diet, because it may be the diet I use to get a lot of weight off of them, because I know they're struggling with carbs because they can't get them where they're supposed to go. But eventually the body will clean those receptor sites and we're going to get them on a diet. So basically a keto diet may be a diet you use for therapy reasons, but it certainly wouldn't be the diet I would use for longevity reasons or sustainability. It wouldn't be the diet you would use to prevent type 2 diabetes or prevent obesity, but it might be the diet you use when you are obese. Imagine that. Of course, in the Myrna Method, what I try to do is just get people to eat right. And ideally, even if you are obese, why not just start on the path of doing it right to begin with? But I can certainly understand where there could be a place for it. But you have to look at the whole biochemistry. And that's what dietitians do. We look at everything. We don't just attach to a diet because it sounds good. You look at the metabolic disease you have, and you also look at the person and the longevity and how to really make it all work. Muscles are important. They deserve to have sugar inside them so you can be energetic, so you can do well in your sport. By the way, if you want to be super lean, burn sugar in your exercise. In other words, you will always burn more fat in glycolysis when you're pushing it in your sport. That's another video we need to do on sports nutrition. Because if I really want to get an athlete kicking butt, I'm going to get the glycogen right, period. So what happens is this sugar serves a really vigorous, wonderful purpose in the cell itself. And then the leftover sugar goes into the mitochondria in a certain passage. There's actually a receptor. And that receptor is the only one that can take fats. So fat doesn't produce energy in the cell like sugar. Fat has to go to the mitochondria in a special place. It's actually called beta oxidation. It goes in a special place. And sugar can also go in that special place. So the mitochondria uses fats and sugar to produce energy for you. So sugar can be used for energy in the cell and in the mitochondria. That's pretty cool. And glucose is quick energy for vigorous tasks. Fats are only used for energy in the mitochondria. Fats enter only in one place. Sugar also can enter in the same place. This is called beta oxidation when fats enter in that place. And also, if you're doing no carbs at all, your body, and it's only dealing with fats, it will store extra fats in the form of ketones. Ketones are also fats. They're just shorter in their chain length. And ketones actually go in the same place. So ketones and fats have to go into a special little door, special little receptor for the mitochondria. And once they get in there, then they can create energy for you. And really, what's, I think, unique about using fats in the mitochondria is you're going to get more ATP. You're going to get more energy units. And there's a lot of people say, well, isn't that better if we're doing endurance sports? And don't we want to eat fat so we can have a more efficient source of energy? Well, yes and no. Clearly, yes and no. I think for long endurance sports, I think there could be definitely room for that, but the body can always take the sugar and move into the mitochondria as well. You have to look at the whole picture, and you have to look at the sport in general. I guess if you're going hiking for 4 days and you're going to hike 20 miles a day, but if you're going to run a marathon and you're going to actually be pushing it, part of that sugar is going to make a difference for you. So the key with the glycogen in the muscle, understanding that it's important for muscles to be happy. And if your muscles aren't happy, you're not staying on your diet, by the way. Seriously, you're not. Because muscles always win. Insulin always wins. The biochemical processes of your body, it's, you can think you're all that, okay? Yeah, I got a lot of willpower. It ain't about willpower. Muscles don't give a doggone. They don't care. They care about one thing, what they want. So to me, glycogen is super important. I don't think people are looking at it. The other thing I want to talk about are these ketones, these short-chain fatty acids as well. Where are ketones made? They're made in the liver. And they're also made in another form in the gut called short-chain fatty acids. And the thing with these ketones and these short-chain fatty acids, by the way, they have health benefits. So if you're on a keto diet, that's why I'm saying we're doing half the circle here. Okay? You're on a keto diet and you're producing ketones, but remember, you're eating a ton of fat as well. So you can also be producing a lot of ceramides. That's a problem. They ought to be talking about it. So it actually could induce insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. But the ketones, if you look at this study, the gut microbiota in this study, it says health benefits and side effects of short-chain fatty acids. And these are the short-chain fats that are made because you ate fiber. See, you make ketones from the liver, which are very similar to the same compound you make in the gut when you eat fiber. Isn't that amazing? So you can be on a keto diet making these ketones, which chemically are very much the same as eating a high fiber diet, making short-chain fatty acids. Ketones are short-chain fatty acids, okay? They're just chemically made in the liver. But bottom line, In this particular study, it talks about the gut microbiota, which is that whole gut bacteria and all the beautiful chemicals that are made from fiber fermentation, play an important role in health and disease of human beings. Short-chain fatty acids are mainly produced by the gut microbiota in the fermentation process of dietary fiber. The short-chain fatty acids have many health benefits such as anti-inflammatory, immune, regulatory, anti-obesity, anti-diabetic, anti-cancer, cardiovascular protective, helps your liver, neuroprotective for the brain. These short-chain fatty acids, I did a video on them, probably could do several more on them. This is not about short-chain fatty acids. All I'm mentioning to you here is that it is a compound of ketones, and why a ketosis diet has popularity. But like I said, you're not looking at the whole picture. So these ketone bodies are very important. I think I have another study here. Let's see if I did this one. No, I didn't bring that about ketones. But ketones, these short-chain fatty acids, same thing apply, okay? They can help with inflammation, the metabolites from doing a ketone diet. So you got to remember, you got to look at the whole circle, because we still have excess fats in the diet. We still have muscles really pissed off at you. And I haven't even gotten to the gut bacteria, because the gut bacteria doesn't really do well with that either, okay? But this video is not going to be about that. We're sticking with muscles. Muscles are mad because they're like, look, I can just burn fats. Yes, obviously. The mitochondria can do beta oxidation all day long. The liver can dump some glucose for ya, but it's never going to be enough to make the muscles happy, especially if you're active. Forget that. Now, if you're morbid obese, you have insulin resistance, there might be some success, quite honestly, with doing a lower carb diet, because at least I'm getting rid of the insulin problem that you're having. Because remember, let's go back to that video. If you're having a lot of issues with this clogging of this receptor site, then you're not going to do well. You're not going to be able to take a lot of carbs, and carbs are going to be a problem for you. Insulin's a problem for you. Now, it's a problem for you, but the root cause of the disease is not the insulin and the sugar. The root cause of the disease is too many fats. But I'm not going to deny that insulin and sugar is a problem. You can't just walk away from that. You can't give somebody that has sugar and insulin a problem a diet with 55% carbs. Please understand, that will never work. Once they get rid of the diabetes, which they should be able to do, type 2 diabetes, then we can start looking at a diet, hopefully, because they'll be active. That would be wonderful if their muscle wanted 55% carbs. That would be great. I mean, I love it. That means you're super healthy, you're active. Maybe they'll just be normal. Maybe their carbs are only 50% or 45%. But they got rid of their metabolic disease. That's my point. So when we look at nutrition, you got to look at the whole picture. And my point in this video is you can't ignore the fact that muscle glycogen is a real deal. And what happens when you don't consider muscle glycogen and you ignore the muscle's desire? The word there is desire, because I know the muscle can go without sugar. The muscles will move less vigorously. If you're an athlete, you know exactly what I mean, because you feel like you got heavy legs. If you're not an athlete, you may never know what I mean. Seriously. If your capacity for carbs are a lot less, you may say, I never even know what she's talking about. But every athlete's going to tell me, oh yeah, I've been there, heavy legs, know what you feel like. It also can increase dehydration, because you're not going to be hydrated like you will when you're doing a balanced diet. The carbs are where they should be. If you're diabetic, you can have some dehydration, right? Insulin resistance as well, because we're not really on a balanced situation with these macronutrients, because you have a metabolic imbalance, basically. And low glycogen, and this is the big one for dieters, it triggers cravings for sugar. Just like excess insulin in the blood triggers more desire for food, when muscles are depleted of carbs, they also have a craving for carbs, which is why you have to have a cheat day. So if you have a high capacity, let's say you're an athlete and your muscles are like, man, you're out there exercising, my capacity for carbs are like 50%, and you're only giving it 40%. You will definitely have some binging. And I see it all the time. They do great Monday through Friday, then they go out on the weekend and they do what's called overconsumption. And that's the other problem, is that when you don't pay attention to this, the body has a makeup system where the body it has a regulatory system with this glycogen metabolism, with this storage. And when you deplete it, the body can go through a super compensation. And we see it a lot with athletes because this is what they do when they do carb loading. Coaches know this really well. They deplete their athletes of glycogen for several days, and then they really give them a ton of carbs because then the body goes for overcompensation. They just eat and eat and eat because the body's trying to meet the depletion. That can also happen with food. Reducing calorie intake may not help you lose body weight. Surprise, surprise. And this study talks about that reducing calorie intake and why it doesn't help you lose weight. In the context of attempting to reduce body weight, the worst possible scenario, for example, is when a large portion supplies more calories. And it definitely it prolongs an increase in energy intake. It tends to become more stored fat. And what happens in this study, it talks about if calories are reduced, the body compensates by decreasing the metabolic rate and also stimulating more food intake. That's how it works, folks. There's no way around it. And glycogen is one of those mechanisms. When muscles aren't happy, you're not happy. So what I really wanted to drive home here is that I felt like when we think of these other diets, and there's usually a reason why you do a diet that's not balanced, right? Because whatever you have may not be balanced. That's how I look at it. But you always have to look at the reason why somebody's doing it. And fasting and keto, to me, it's not a sustainable program because it's not how your body would want you to sustain. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't some benefits from being metabolically imbalanced. You have other issues, and that might be the seesaw I'm talking about. You have to do an extreme here to get us in the mid-road here. But I think the thing we all have to look for and understand is the reason why the body wants you to eat the macronutrients a certain way is to create a balance in the body. It wants you to have enough protein. It wants you to have no insulin response. It wants to run in a very regulatory way. When it comes to glycogen, it's really based on the muscle's capacity, the desire. Let's call it desire. And it can change. It's based on your ideal body weight, not what you weigh now. That would be crazy. That wouldn't even make sense. Protein is based on your current body weight because you want to maintain the mass you have now. And fat grams, I always look at it being on your ideal body weight. Why do you want to eat the number of fat grams to keep you fatter? So when you look at macronutrients, and we're just looking at the muscle's desire, because that's the idea, is we don't want to trigger addiction. We don't want to have the body want to overeat and compensate. And we want to be vigorous and we want to have energy. It's based on activity and insulin resistance. If you have insulin resistance, you're not getting sugar in the muscle. Yeah, you betcha the capacity is going to be lower. And you're probably going to be more tired as well. So I hope this video helped. I'm going to leave it open for some questions. Okay, perfect. Oh, one more thing. Because I did have a question in my membership program last night, and I want to address it with the ketone bodies. So if the ketones, let me go back here. The ketones in the mitochondria, if you have a situation where you have insulin resistance and you're not doing well with sugar, I'm trying to find my insulin resistant video. There we go. Yeah, it does make sense that ketone bodies, like people are saying, do you take these ketone supplements? Will it make a difference? Well, if you have insulin resistance in the brain, let's just go there, and you're not able to get sugar in the brain, then you have a problem with a lot of sugar in the blood. And that's the other thing, is that a lot of times when people watch my videos, I'm explaining one thing and they're running off on a tangent. Bottom line, if you're not getting sugar in the brain and you can use a ketone will help because you have insulin resistant in the brain. Maybe you have Alzheimer's. So if you have Alzheimer's, you've had this insulin resistance in the brain for a while, you didn't know it, and you caused a scenario where you didn't have a healthy transfer. That created a lot of tall plaque. Well, yeah, if you have an issue where you can't get sugar in the brain, and you have a lot of sugar circulating because there's certain neurons that don't need insulin to get sugar, and it can cause a lot of disruption, this can cause a lot of scarring in the brain. So once you have Alzheimer's, it doesn't make sense then to keep, you may have to do more of a keto diet. It may be better to do ketones for energy, right? Because you've lost that capacity. You're not functioning the way you did. So to prevent the disease is the exact opposite diet once you have the disease. To take keto supplements, I'm not sure what the purpose is if you're not on a ketogenic diet, because your body would just use the glycogen. Anyways, you make ketones the same effect for these short chain fatty acids. So I'm saying eat a good fiber diet, create these short chain fatty acids. You don't have to do the keto. You don't have to bring all these fats in. And those same ketones that you're trying to supplement can have all the health benefits by bringing in all these good dietary fibers. So I hope that answered the question from last night's stream. Okay, so Sam? Yeah.
So let's see. So don't read the yellow. Just
okay.
You don't have to read the name out, but
Okay.
just read it out loud.
So it says, just look at the Ken Berry videos on this diet. This is not true. You're better off using ketones as fuel rather than adding sugar or carbs to your diet, because when your body makes its own glucose. Yeah, and that's a really interesting, it depends where you are in the biochemistry. In other words, if you have a situation where you have insulin resistance, you're not doing well with carbs. You're not doing well with glucose. But to say that you're using ketones to what you're basically doing is you're taking a metabolic situation where you now have a situation that carbs don't work well. So I'm saying let's get rid of the root cause of the problem, which are these ceramides. Let's try to get us back on balance. Then adding fuel to the fire isn't going to be good, right? Adding sugar to somebody who's not handling sugar is not a good thing. I understand. But what we have to do, and what I do as the dietitian, is I'm not giving them massive amounts of carbs. I'm balancing the carbs. I'm slowing down the entry of the carbs into the system. I'm using chemistry to understand how to balance those carbs and slowly start getting them on a path of reversing insulin resistance. Because if you're having to do ketones and you're having to do these diets, it's because you have the metabolic imbalance.
And here, let me just see the microphone.
And your body does make its own glucose, by the way, but the liver, the amount of glucose the liver makes gets you through with the keto. But remember, you have a lot of other issues going on as well. You have an excess of these fatty acids that we're seeing in the science now that can cause disruption in the gut, because a lot of these foods in a keto diet create bacteria that travel to other parts of the body. I've talked about that in some of my videos, the TMAO bacteria. So a lot of the foods that you're eating on keto have other consequences, okay? So I don't want to just zero in on one metabolic issue. I want to be able to open up the whole picture.
And Just to clarify, just so the audience knows, the person in question, Ken D. Barry, MD, he's got 3.25 million subscribers. And so I kind of looked a little into him, and it might be a very interesting video in the future to kind of go through certain YouTube streamers, certain people, and really dive into their diets and see how that stacks up for you.
Yeah.
And he has a book, and it's called The Proper Human Diet Guidebook.
Okay.
And I think that would be very interesting that we dive into that, look into it,
that would be
see
awesome. Yeah.
see if that really holds up to something you want.
And I also say that with diets, there's usually a reason, like if you have epilepsy, you're going to have a different type of diet, more keto based. You have Alzheimer's. There are definitely reasons to modify it. But I also find that in eating the way the body would like, without having these metabolic issues, how your body originally would want you to eat, and the reasons why, I think needs to come into light. And, these ceramides, you can look that up. Dr. Scott Summers does some great research on that. I don't think these guys talk about that. This has been probably in the medical journals in the last, I'd say for sure, in the last 2 decades. And they're not really talking about some other things that I'm bringing to light. So, I hope that helps. But I think it's all good because that's why I'm here. I'm here to educate you and bring other science to the table that maybe, I understand where they're coming from with theirs, but maybe they're not bringing some of the science that I'm bringing to the table. And I think it's good to kind of look at everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I appreciate it. Very good. Thank you. Yeah. Like and subscribe.
Oh, you say it.
Oh, like and subscribe. Did I do that right? Okay.
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 That's it.
Any other questions?
No, that's it.
Okay, great. And we had another one here. As always, great evidence research-based discussions. Thank you for cutting through all the BS and going to the metabolic pathways and looking at all the effects of choosing some of these diets. And that person I know is a nurse. Yeah. Yeah, because she's one of the people that have been on my stream. Okay, great, guys. I appreciate it. And I will definitely look into... definitely. Awesome.
All right.
See you later. Thank you.